Good afternoon. My name's Rachel, and I'm talking to you about monitoring sleep, which is something that I've been doing for quite a few years now. This is the last in the talks from today's Sleep Summit. I hope you found them really useful and interesting. I know I certainly have, and it's a really useful reminder to be reminded how important sleep actually is, which brings me back to why I started to monitor my sleep in the first place. So I started after my second child was born. I was wanting to get back to health and fitness. It was quite a challenging period with his birth and my recovery. I think I've always been fairly aware of the importance and impact of sleep for me personally. It drastically alters my mood, my ability to be physically active. So I asked for a Fitbit for my birthday. I chose one called the Ionic. It can record running and activities because it's got GPS abilities. I've always been a runner, but it also monitors sleep. So this does mean you have to wear it all the time, which I don't think I was too keen on at first, but you do very quickly get used to it. I'm sure there's all sorts of different devices that you can use to monitor sleep. I don't know them all. I just know that I always use the Fitbit and found it really useful. For me, it's not about which device particularly, it's about just having a device, and it's about the consistency of recording the data. So the data you want to be looking at are the trends, the patterns, overall insights and conclusions. It's not really about picking out specific numbers and overanalyzing those. It's about looking at your sleep over time and thinking about what you can learn. Improving sleep, which has been one of the big topics throughout today. It's quite hard to improve your sleep if you don't know the facts. If you don't know how many hours you sleep, if you don't know what the quality of your sleep is based upon your different time in the different sleep cycles. So the first thing, obviously, knowledge is power. So if you can find a device that monitors your sleep, starting to create a log of your sleep would be a great place to go. So that's what I did. And I've now got 4 or 5 years worth of data that I can draw upon to make some conclusions about my own sleep. Okay. So the first and probably most obvious metric when you're talking about monitoring sleep is how many hours do you get per night? A very simple initial number to start to work with. Obviously, everyone is completely different. It's about finding out how many hours you need. Obviously, the recommendation is 7 to 8 hours of sleep, or even slightly longer. And when you start to be able to understand how many hours you get each night, you notice patterns of how you feel. So for me personally, I feel much better on 8 hours of sleep. However, with young children and all sorts of things going on, that's not always realistic. But once you know how many hours you're actually getting, you can then obviously adjust your bedtime earlier so that you'll get enough. For example, if you're getting woken up early in the morning and you're going to bed at midnight, for example, that you're not going to get enough hours of sleep every night. So it's about knowing what sort of time realistically you are being woken up and adjusting your bedtime to earlier, particularly if you've had a couple of nights in a row where you aren't getting as much sleep. So simple adjustments as well. It might mean not watching that extra episode of Netflix series or putting your book down before you really want to. Once you start to know this, it affects your behavior in a really positive way. But if you weren't monitoring your sleep, you might not know how many hours you're actually getting and that you even needed to do that. So this is an example of the sort of output you get from Fitbit. This is a week's worth of data and shows the hours I slept in 1 week. Friday's data is missing. Doesn't mean I didn't sleep on Friday. It just means I probably had my watch on charge. As I say, I've been doing this for years and years and years, so I'm probably not quite as regular as I used to be. about making sure I monitor everything because I've got a good handle on the sort of patterns. So what you can see in this, you can see the days of the week and the hours of sleep that I managed to get. I've set a good level of sleep as 7.5 hours, where you can see the white line going horizontally across, and you get a little star on the days that you achieve that. Obviously in this week, I only achieved it a couple of times, but not too far off on the others. A little bit of work to do on the Tuesday and Wednesday there. But it's just great to start to look at these patterns, start to see how many hours you've slept. The Fitbit will also give you advice if you're not hitting your benchmarks on a regular basis. So once you become accustomed to knowing how many hours of sleep you're getting, you can start to see a weekly average hours. You can start to see patterns of good weeks and less good weeks. You can start to think about reasons why and make changes to make your sleep better. So the next level, after you know the hours, will be starting to think about a consistent sleep schedule. Now, this is something that Olive already talked about quite a lot in her talk. And she talked about training your circadian rhythms. So your body becomes accustomed to going to sleep and waking up at the same time each day. I know personally, I love the idea of a lie-in. I actually feel awful if I do try to lie in because my body wants me to wake up at the same time each day. Again, this is completely personal, just speaking from my experience. So within the realms of practicality, experts would recommend you go to bed, you wake up at the same time as far as possible. So on the Fitbit monitor as well, you can set a bedtime, which alerts you. That might work for some of you. So spending time in different sleep stages. So earlier in the day on the Sleep Summit, Olive spoke to us about different sleep stages, about having the REM sleep, which is the light sleep, where your eyes, rapid eye movement sleep, into the deep sleep, which is the NREM sleep. So each night, your Fitbit will give you data, not just about how long you've slept, but about the length of time in each sleep stage. So you can see the top of the chart. It gives a really nice graphic about the amount of awake sleep in the red, REM sleep in the light blue, light sleep in the slightly darker blue, and deep sleep in the dark blue. And it shows you throughout the night where you are in terms of your sleep stages. And then it gives you the time spent in each stage. I think it's fair to say, when you look at this data in isolation, it's vaguely interesting, but I don't think it's very meaningful in terms of understanding your sleep. What I do think is useful, though, is if you go on to benchmark that sleep. So if you click on the benchmarking button, this benchmarks the time you've spent in each stage against the typical range for your gender and your age group. And this is when the data becomes a lot more interesting and also gives you a quick flash check to say, am I getting about enough sleep in each stage? So it's just a quick reference to go, yep, got enough REM sleep, enough light sleep, enough deep sleep. I'm doing all right though. Because as we know, it's important to spend enough time in each stage. But in terms of, if you just look at the first chart, you might think, oh, over half my night was spent just in light sleep. Is that okay? Yes, it is, because, that's the stage in between REM and the deep sleep. And, you're not going to spend more than 18-20% of your night in deep sleep. But as long as you get, for example, for my age range for women, as long as I get 12 to 18%, that's about right. So that's probably the single most important thing for me that I would look at quickly on a fairly regular basis, just to check that I'm getting enough sleep in each of the areas. Then again, you can look at your sleep stages across the week. So this is the same week as before, with the Friday data missing. And also then you can start to look at your data across the month. So you can see in this chart, you can see the average hours per night across the whole month. So this was November 2020. And also you start to see the pattern of the different sleep stages. As I say, when you start to look at this data, you can extrapolate that out to a year. Over a long time, it starts to become more interesting for you in terms of how you're sleeping or where you might need to make improvements. So if you recall in one of the earlier talks in the day, the deep sleep was coming more at the beginning of the night, you know, so if that's the part where you start to monitor and see you're not getting enough deep sleep, you could think what's happening in that first chunk of sleep when you've gone to sleep, you know, are you being woken up for any reason, and how can you then take actions to remedy that? I think in Mike's talk, we were told that, you know, you can probably go for 2 or 3 days with a poor quality sleep. But I think he said it was, you can start to see impacts on your mental health after only 3 days of poor sleep, and serious impacts after 2 weeks. So that's when this monitoring becomes really important. And if you come to monitor sleep, you find that there's patterns over a long period of time, you know, that's when you really need to think about how can you help improve your sleep. So the Fitbit will also give you a sleep score, which is quite a useful overall metric. Again, this is all about having quick checks to see, am I doing all right? Did I do all right? Because no one's got time in their day to spend hours and hours analysing their sleep. So the sleep score is quite a good quick check. So Fitbit calculates this by combining data on your heart rate, your time awake or your restlessness, and your time in various sleep stages. So this is an example of what sleep score output would look like for the month of February this year. Sorry, just for the last week, from the 1st to the 7th of February. Fitbit says a poor score would be below 60, fair 60 to 80, good 80 to 89, and excellent 90 to 100. I think I've only had excellent a couple of times, but you know, mine, luckily, mine does tend to sit in the good score, and sometimes fair. Obviously, I've been doing this for months, years. I've been monitoring my sleep regularly. It barely takes me any time now to know what I'm looking for. And obviously, over that time, I've made the necessary changes to improve, to get better scores. I know I could probably do with getting a few more hours a night. Overall, I'm happy with my data. And I know that for me personally, I'll be running a marathon later this year again. And I know the importance of sleep and, you know, how you perform in a marathon, particularly with that sort of duration. So I will be trying to get more sleep in the months leading up to the marathon. And I think the main key thing really for me is being realistic about your wake up time. So you know, you might think, oh yes, you know, I'll wake up at 6:30, 7 o'clock, or whatever it might be each night. But realistically, you may have a small child who's got other ideas, and you always sort of are conscious that they're awake from about 6. So rather than going back, say 7, 8 hours from 7 o'clock, you know, going back from 6 and thinking, you know, just in case I get woken up early in the morning, what time does that mean I need to go to bed? So once we know what the data is on our sleep, then we can try to make changes. In one of Olive's earlier talks, she talked about what changes to make in terms of how to get to sleep, but also staying asleep. So some of the things that I've learned just from doing this monitoring, I know my sleep's better if I don't eat a couple of hours before sleeping, at least. If I don't do strenuous exercise a couple of hours before sleeping, if I have a fully blacked out room, that makes a big difference. And all sorts of other changes that I've made over the years. I also definitely know that I run better if I get better sleep in the days leading up to a race, for example. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there for now. There is a lot you could say about sleep monitoring. It's a massive topic. Hopefully that's useful. As I say, just start off with the simple metrics of how many hours do I get. And then if you can get that detail below with the sleep stages as well, you really start to get some insight that becomes very useful in terms of how you can improve your own sleep. Hopefully that's been useful for you. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you got a lot out of it. And I wish you all a very good night's sleep. Thank you.